Tonight, for opening night, we have an incredibly special film, Newtown, which many of you already know, concerns the Sandy Hook Elementary school shootings in which 20 children were killed and 6 adults, support staff. It was the deadliest mass shooting of school children in United States history. And it has scarred our country and has led to a great deal of activism, largely on the heels of this incredible film. I can tell you that in the 11 years that we have done this, we have never shown a more important, more engrossing film. And that's quite an endorsement. We've never shown anything this important, especially in an election year. This film, ironically, is not a political film. And yet it is. But it doesn't explicitly come across as a political film. And regardless of how you feel about the gun control issue, you should be here. People should see this. It opens nationally, 500 theaters around the United States. So if you have friends, this is the kind of film that you will tell your friends about, I hope, and they'll be able to see it starting November 2nd nationally. It is also, and I hate to say this because you won't understand what I mean, it's a horror film, but not that kind of horror film. And we shouldn't laugh at horror films. I tell my students all the time, horror films are about an injustice, a truth that got buried, and everyone's going to be haunted until that truth is known, until justice is done, and a wrong is righted. And that's exactly what this film is about. There is an injustice, there's a truth that needs to be told, and none of us will be better unless that wrong is righted. So it's in the truest sense of what a horror film should be. I will say just one brief thing before we watch the film. We've got 4 really exciting, it's 4, right? 4 incredibly dynamic people. First of all, the film's director, Kim Snyder, was with us here today. And Dr. William Begg, who was the attending emergency room physician at Danbury Hospital on that day, Dr. Begg. And Abbey Clements, who was for 11 years a second-grade teacher at Sandy Hook Elementary. Fortunately, on that day, her children survived, and in fact, she rescued 2 third-graders, which we'll talk about, one of her school teachers, Abbey Clements. And last but not least, the lovely Maria Cuomo-Cole, who is the producer of this film. Now, for those of you who've been with us for years, you know that this festival could be called the Maria Cuomo-Cole Film Festival, because this is the 3rd time we've shown one of Maria's films, and that only says that she makes important and smart movies, and we just showcase them. Our first film for her that we showcased was The Invisible War, which is a film about sexual assault in the U.S. military that immediately resulted in congressional action to change the situation of women in the military. A few years ago, we showed The Hunting Ground, which is a film about sexual assault on college campuses. And now we're showing this incredibly important film about gun control. You should not be confused, in case there was any surprise about her middle name. Yes, she is the younger sister of the governor of this state. But much more importantly, she's the middle child of the former Mario Cuomo, who was the 3-term governor for New York State, and who was a great friend of the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society. We had him here for a conversation one year. We had him for the film series. He and Larry King discussed The Godfather. That was classic. In fact, it was on the front page of the Metro. It was on the front page of the Metro section of the New York Times. And without getting too weepy, Maria, I would say that there isn't any doubt that your father would be incredibly proud of his crusading daughter. So sit tight. I can't tell you to enjoy the film. It's just not that kind of movie. I will tell you this. This movie will change you. You will be a different person when you leave. And hopefully you'll tell others to watch this movie on November 2nd, and we'll have this incredible conversation after. Thank you for coming. Well, let me just reintroduce everyone. Over there, farthest from my side, is Kim Snyder, the director of the film. And to her right is a formerly second-grade teacher from Sandy Hook Elementary, Abbey Clements. of course, the producer of our film, Maria Cuomo-Cole, and Dr. William Begg, who was the attending physician, and as you know, at the emergency room, and as you know, both William and Abbey, you just saw them in this film. In so many ways, silence is the appropriate way to speak to this film. Just let everyone sit with it. How are you for? Because I'm not well. I can say that this film, Kim, grabs you from the first frame and simply does not let go. And it's really quite an achievement. It is, in so many ways, a movie about the aftermath and a movie about the trauma to a community. But I guess the first question to ask is, maybe the four of you can speak to, how is the community today? William, Abbey, maybe?
Well, thanks everyone for coming out and giving this this opportunity for you to see what happens to a town that's affected by gun violence. So where is our town today? Well, it depends on where you stand as far as your perspective on how the town's doing. We are continuing to heal as a town, yet we are in many ways trying our best to move on as a town also. It is an interesting phenomena that, and Abby and I talk about this, within Newtown, we rarely talk about the events of what has happened, yet when we're in a forum like this, we talk about it. Now, from the medical perspective, I do know that there's a number of us collectively that still have not recovered. Many of my friends and family and colleagues have not gone back to work. Many are in therapy. Many of us have had job changes or moved out of town. So the recovery phase will continue for years and even generations to come.
Abby?
I agree. It's complicated to live in the town, to teach in the town, to continue to try to move forward there. In light of what happened, it sometimes is the elephant in the room, even teaching. I'm now at another elementary school, and sometimes, you know, parents will talk, and it's kind of the underlying connection of the conversation, but we're not really talking about it. So whether it's about maybe your stomach aches or child's having trouble sleeping, and come to find out, you know, there was a connection with one of the children who was killed. So it's ever present, but you can also see glimmers of change, and sometimes change is part of the recovery. So it's complicated.
We know that the shooter's home was demolished. We know that the school reopened with a new school just this past summer. But I think it's also fair to say that Newtown can never really be renewed. And what you've just described suggests that. This is sort of a 9/11 for just a small town. And they can never possibly be the same. We want to speak words, especially as a physician, about healing and repair, but maybe that's just altogether the wrong words when we're talking about this kind of a tragedy. Let me ask the next question. How are the four of you? And the reason I'm asking this, and I want to include Maria and Kim in this, is that you have lived through this, not just through the experience, but the experience of the film. This is not your first time appearing together. You've been doing this, and you're going to continue to do this. Dr. Begg, jokingly said, yeah, you know, and it's not clear that hospitals love me running around the country talking about this. But, you know, the question is, it's not possible to be desensitized by this material. No matter how many times you talk about it, you can never become inured to it. But is it re-traumatizing every time you talk about it?
One of the comments that one of our friends who lost a child and who's in the movie said, she was quite eloquent. She said, every time I see the movie, it rips the scab off those wounds that are trying to heal. And so, you know, we apologize for not sitting in the movie during the showing, but one of the ways we are able to see additional or speak to crowds or folks who are interested is to maybe step aside. But I think it's important that we also maintain our lives outside of here and have outside interests, because when we come back and do discuss this topic of the after effects of gun violence, it is quite emotional. And personally, there's never been a time I have watched this movie where I have not had tears streaming down my cheek, because it does bring me back. I mean, just think about it. I mean, when you look at that movie, when I look at that movie, and Abby, you may have a similar experience. I mean, I live in Newtown. I mean, that parade is a mile from my house. On Churchill Road, Father Bob, I mean, he's my pastor. I mean, all my kids went to St. Rose School and were baptized there. I mean, that's traumatizing seeing the film. But I will say, though, we are absolutely moving on. And you know what? This movie has shown, or this town has shown, what strength we have, because we are closer as a community, and we are absolutely, many of us are doing special things and moving on with our lives. So those are my thoughts.
Abby, how can you sit here on stage with us?
I have to tell you that the whole process of this film, getting to know Kim and Maria and being part of this is part of my recovery and continues to be. And I was just a teacher and a mom. And I say that but I loved my life. And now, like one of my colleagues said in the film, it's clearly delineated, you know, the person who I was prior to 12-14 and who I am now. And there are parts of me now who I think the person prior would be like, oh my God, you're really doing that? You're going around talking about gun violence prevention and what can we do to prevent this, and getting to know survivors across the country who I have a bond with, who they're like family to me. So this is definitely part of who I am now, and being with the film, I think it models very much what the film is about. It's about the inability or the difficulty that we have talking about hard things, talking about loss, talking about trauma. And you know, we travel around with Nicole Hockley and Mark Barton and Bill, and we're doing just what the film is saying, that we have to fight against. So I'm eternally grateful that my daughter trusted you first and said, no, Mom, really, Kim's good. It's okay. You know. So.
Kim, you and Maria strategically, tactically, politically, morally, ethically decided to leave the shooter's name out of the film. Everyone here notices that. You're a documentary filmmaker and a very skilled one, and so you know it's your job to document, and yet here's something you've chosen not to document, and perhaps it's because the shooter, he wanted to be documented, and you didn't feel that he had the right in your film to be documented. So tell us, is that what you were thinking? Was this an ongoing question? Did you decide at the outset that he was not going to be acknowledged in this film?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things as a filmmaker is to decide in some ways what your film isn't before you even know what it is. And I knew there were a whole number of different films that could be made. One would be a very overt gun reform advocacy movie. Another might be about the shooter and all that went into that. And the other that I felt strongly about, and Maria joined forces with me early on, that we both felt strongly about, was the story, in fact, of aftermath and the point of view of an entire community as a whole, and how the trajectory of what this looks like years out. And so we talked so much in the edit room with our editor about that, and my feeling about it wasn't just when I later learned something Maria knew earlier on, that there is this campaign called No Notoriety, where the media is being asked not to focus on the name of the shooter or the shooters. But even before I knew that, as a filmmaker trying to portray the point of view of these people that I had built relationships with, I felt that. I felt one with not acknowledging him. And I also felt that if my job was to have their point of view, what I was observing was that people really didn't even have the bandwidth in a way. I felt like people were absorbed with what you see of how am I gonna restore my relationship with my neighbor? How am I gonna talk to my teacher friend again who isn't in the same place I am? So, and I remember an early conversation with Abby's daughter, Sarah, who's just the loveliest young woman. And it was off camera down in DC where she now goes to school. And she said it so eloquently back then, something about we spent in the very beginning, we went crazy trying to figure out something. And then you realized there was no explanation. And so anyway, I just felt like it was the most truthful rendering of how the community was dealing with that. And it just had to be something not there so much.
Marie, you want to add to that? Because I have another question for you as well.
I will add to that because, I don't know if I'm on, if you can hear me. Because Kim and I 100% agreed about this. And okay, I'll take the mic. We agreed about this 100%, and it was really also a matter of deference and respect to the families of the survivors. And I knew this from other experiences with survivor communities and specifically shootings. They do not want to hear the name of the shooter because that gave them an identity and a dignity that they, they were not comfortable with. And I also just wanted to comment about your first question regarding the community, and I know I speak for Kim as well, in that, we really feel a tremendous message point of the film is about community resilience and the importance of community coming together and supporting each other. And, and we do see that in the community, and we feel like we've seen it build over the years.
Now, knowing you, Maria, I know that for you, even though Kim made this in a much more subtle, apolitical tone, but for you, politics is in your blood. And you surely thought that this film, just like you did with your first two films, could be used as a vehicle to change public policy. Can you tell us how the film, so far, it opened at Sundance. It's going to receive a PBS screening at some point. It's got a commercial release on November 2nd. Don't forget to tell your friends around the country to watch it. I know that the film has screened at the White House. Can you tell us how have you used this film to persuade legislators and elected officials to inspire meaningful change?
Well, we feel, first of all, and felt throughout the process that the only way to tell this story, a story that needed to be told, a story that a lot of people are ambivalent about watching, perhaps, concerned about the emotion, but a film that we don't, a story we don't have the luxury to forget. And we worked hard at the art of the film so that it wasn't overbearing, that in no way was it, graphically revealing, and that this is really the way in rather than an overtly strong political or advocacy story. This is a human story that touches hearts. We are fortunate to be working with people like Bill and like Abby, and really who have become, a family with us around the mission of the film. And the families, as you see, are, extraordinarily inspiring people, and both individually and within their family units. And we have great admiration and appreciation for them pushing through their pain to ensure that this doesn't happen to other communities and other families. We are bringing those message points to federal government. Yes, we did screen at the White House, coincidentally on the one date they gave us, which was June 15th, just 3 days after the Orlando shooting, where we were together in Connecticut screening the film. And one anecdote about the power of these kinds of films is that Congressman Himes from Connecticut was actually in the audience, and it was he the next morning who walked out of the House chamber on Paul Ryan's call for a moment of silence. And he said, no more moments of silence. I saw the film Newtown last night and my friends from Newtown, and no more silence. So we will continue to bring the film to congressional districts and difficult communities where the votes are not easily had.
Dr. Beggs, you didn't go to medical school anticipating such a day. No residency requirement could have prepared you for such a day. Can you talk a little about that? I mean, you could not have certainly anticipated it, and I guess I wonder whether you might want to speak to that the world has changed in such horrendous, horrific ways after the Boston Marathon bombing, after the killing in the Orlando nightclub this past summer, and of course, Sandy Hook, that I wonder whether doctors now have to think about, emergency room doctors have to think that these days can come up.
Yeah, so, well, thank you for that question. That's a great question. So, first 25 years of my medical career, you're right, gun violence and gun violence initiatives were not on the radar of myself or others in the medical profession. In fact, my first day as a medical student, first day in the Bronx, first patient was a store owner who was shot to death, and I saw his chest opened and resuscitative efforts, and I was disappointed that the whole team, after the person died, just went on to see the next patient. There was not even any chatter or anything about how that could have been prevented. And then for 25 years in New York, and when I trained in Baltimore at Hopkins, and then in Connecticut, we would see mostly suicide more than the deaths that happened at Sandy Hook, and we never did anything about it. When the Sandy Hook tragedy happened, and I was standing in my ER, and I saw what I saw, as I said in the movie, I truly said, I am not taking this laying down, and I will dedicate the rest of my life to affording some change. Now, our medical profession is starting to come around, but absolutely has to do a better job. I mean, what they've done in the past has been an embarrassment as far as not being proactive or recognizing that this is a public health issue. Unbelievably, just this past year, finally, the American Medical Association said this is a public health issue. When you designate it as such, research comes to pass, monies are sent to that initiative, education it goes out throughout the country. You know, if you think about what happens with the AIDS epidemic, similarly, there was people were vilified, and there was no proactive. There was nothing proactive initially, and then all of a sudden, folks banded together, demanded action, demanded research and monies, and I think we're better off now compared to a generation ago. So we have a long way to go. I will absolutely say one final thought on this. A huge amount has changed in a positive direction. Before the Sandy Hook tragedy, I could not be up on stage here. I would absolutely have lost my job. There's no doubt. It was too controversial. After the incident happened, I was warned not to associate myself with my hospital, and for many years, I reported myself as only being with the United Physicians in Newtown, which I am associated with, and also Sandy Hook Ride. But now, the hospital networks are coming around and are recognizing this is a public health issue. So for that, I'm grateful.
Abbey, you no longer teach at Sandy Hook Elementary, but you're still an elementary school teacher. And I think you did teach for just a few years after. Obviously, you've undergone some process in thinking about where you were going to continue your career as a teacher in addition to this new role that you've adopted, that the old you, as you said, would have been surprised to discover, that you had been thinking about gun violence and crime prevention. You'd never thought of yourselves in that way. What about the teaching aspect of your career? How did you decide not to teach anymore at Sandy Hook?
That's a difficult question, but I'm really glad that you bring it up, because a therapist early on once said that my colleagues and I, we were like soldiers coming back from a war, and that we have a bond that we will have forever. People who you ate lunch with, or you taught with next door to for many years, or somebody you didn't know very well, taught around the corner. So the decision to leave was really difficult. I wanted to stay until all the children who I had that most impacted year and the year after went all the way through 4 years. But I just felt like, for me to try to get my teaching back, and also to have a life of advocacy, I had to separate a little bit, just because of the heaviness that you talk about with the film. It was kind of like every day. And everybody, it's a very personal decision on how you move forward. Many teachers went to the new building, and some people decided that that was not for them for whatever reason. And I, from day one, knew that I was not going to return to the site if it were a school. So with those two things, with all those decisions to make, I had to make a really hard one to leave. And in a sense, it did allow me, because I'm teaching a new grade, and that did allow me to focus again on the teaching. I had to learn a new curriculum, and I was in a school where I knew only one family. And that was a little bit freeing for me, even though, of course, I really missed everybody over there. It did give me an opportunity to start all over again. Another thing, the reason why it was hard, and I just want to tell you this because it's like, there's both this beautiful thing and this really hard thing, is the boundaries that teachers and families and students had. After the tragedy, it was like they were all gone. And so, students who I ran out of a building with for years would see me in the hallway, even if when they were older, would, love you, Mrs. Clements, jump on me, hug me, run up from wherever they were to give me a hug. And although that was what got you through those early years, it was a decision I made to kind of get that back, a little bit of a boundary, and the teacher and the student and the families, and try.
I can't not ask this question for you, Abby, but do I have this right? You were in your second grade classroom, and you had all your kids sort of to gather together, and you had them in a corner. And somehow, at some point, you saw 2 third graders by themselves walking through the hallway, carrying their attendance sheets, and you grabbed them and brought them into your classroom.
So I was trying to get it really quiet, so that, because I heard that the principal was coming in to do some observations, and I wanted to do something fun before she did that. So it was very quiet right before the noise, and I was, there's a second door on the right of the building. So when I heard the noise, I thought it was chairs, but it was loud enough, and then I heard yelling that I ran out to the door and opened it. And I have no idea what, it's just all was instinct, and you all would do the same things. I saw 2 kids in the hall, and I just grabbed them.
And they were walking right toward the gunman.
Yeah, and it was just like kind of panic in the hall. I actually joked with some of my colleagues later, I know that sounds strange, but you just did, that they were there too. And I don't know why I didn't say, come in my room. I'd left the adults there, but I saw the kids and I just, you know, kind of scooped them up. And when you tell me that, I can see them right now because they were all like smushed together, even the two new ones, you know, who weren't in our class. But anyway, and then I had this worry that their teacher would be worried about them, so I had that. And then the situation, so it was, but you know, it was instinct.
You do know, though, I mean, I don't know, I guess they're in middle school now, but one of them or both of them are going to name a daughter Abbey.
I'll always have a bond with them, you know, and even if we're
life.
not, we don't keep in touch on a regular basis, like, they'll always be there.
Kim, how did you resist the temptation to make the film more avowedly, explicitly political? It's not a document in that way. It's not a manifesto. No matter how Maria will continue to promote the film in a way that's crusading, the film is more nuanced. And you must have at some point had to resist the temptation to be louder.
I felt, as I became more and more trusted and more immersed in this town, I felt such a responsibility. These are real relationships, and since the film's ended, these are even more important friendships. And I felt very much that drawn to that it's as much about grief and town resilience as it is about gun violence. But at the same time, I feel just like Mark now when he says, "I'm just a guitar player. I feel the same way. I'm just a filmmaker, but I feel the more I get to know them, the more immersed and the more, honestly, these strange dual feelings. We were just out talking about feeling like at this moment, in this political time, we have such an opportunity to get in a different way. But Maria and I were never at odds about that, even though I knew she had been steeped in this. We agreed very much that we had to get in through a different way, as she said. And so, the irony now is that this film that keeps calling itself not an advocacy film, we're hearing every day is making impact, perhaps. And I also just, as a filmmaker, have to say, I tend to really trust viewers and audiences. And so I feel like in the beginning, there felt like so much responsibility. That's what I started to say. So much, I still feel it, incredible responsibility. It's such a big story. It's so important. But I also at a certain point thought, you know what? Just to break through desensitization and bear witness, if I could just do that, that would be important. And it really does, harken back to something we've heard so much of in our lives about, if you forget, it can happen again. So I felt like this needed to, with the 3 seconds between each of these things, this, they're all horrible. This one happened to involve innocent little first graders. I think there's something primal for everyone about that, and it needed to be, as you so eloquently said in the beginning, it's a scarring, horrible, historic thing that can't be forgotten. Mm-hmm.
Maria, as an activist, help us with the politics of the film and the deployment of the film. I mean, it just seems, I guess, because we live in a blue state and we're in Greenwich Village, we're just the most progressive area of the country, so it's easy to speak in blue terms. It just seems so simple, right? I mean, we're talking about background checks, and we're also talking about banning semi-automatic assault weapons that clearly, I think was one of the fathers said, have no place in a school, or frankly, anywhere other than on a battlefield. Is this, help us understand, is this because the gun lobby is so incredibly influential and powerful that they can buy votes in Congress? Or, and I say this with great humility, is it that we are a violent country at heart and we like our guns? And that people will, the questions that are constantly asked of course you have a Second Amendment liberty, but my son had a liberty. Well, there are going to be you know, gun lobby enthusiasts who would watch that film and says, no, I do not think your son's life supersedes my right to have a semi-automatic. I mean, they would say it with a straight face. And I wonder in moments like these, do I want to live in a country that people actually think that? And so help us understand what people say when the film is presented to Congress and they say, look, Miss Cuomo-Cole, I got a problem.
Well, you're exactly right. America indeed loves their guns. And yes, many would say our Second Amendment right is more important. It is most important, and we don't want it challenged in any way, shape, or form. So that is the debate, certainly. You know, that being said, we were just having this conversation earlier. You know, 92% of Americans were in strong support of background checks. Right. And the question is really not so much about the strength of the NRA, which is relatively small, actually. Their membership is not terribly large in number. It's really the power of the 92% of really influencing their lawmakers and culture and speaking louder and in a more organized way. Remember, the last two losses of legislation did not include an assault ban. It was simply background checks.
Which makes it even more astonishing.
Which makes it even more astonishing. And, you know, we have had stricter gun laws. We had, you know, the Brady Bill, of course. But I think that we took it for granted. We let too much go too quickly. And now, over a long period of time, we're taking a look back and saying, blue states are saying, hey, wait a minute, you know, we're concerned about those border states. You know, we might have stricter gun laws, which was a positive outcome, at least, of the loss in 2013. But of course, you know, we need universal background checks, and I personally feel we need an assault ban.
But I don't think, not sure the audience knows. I just learned this for the first time. I mean, I did not realize that the last attempt to initiate federal legislation on gun control, again, which included, I think, the assault ban and the background checks, passed in the House and was then rejected in the Senate.
That's right.
So there must have been some feeling of elation in the post-Sandy Hook era that the House managed to pass such legislation only to be thwarted. So, you know this game better than anyone in this room or in this city. Are we on the road to a victory? Did that signal something that we should be thinking?
There was some movement, and the state's action is very important, and hopefully we're going to be in a climate in Washington very soon where government can actually start working again, because it's been stagnant for a really long time. So we feel hopeful about that. And I'll just say one more thing and let others share. You know, we were also just talking about the impact of the film. You'd be surprised, even in blue states, even in, you know, sharing with the choir, a lot of people don't understand that assault weapons can be brought into one's home. We don't really think about weapons and firearms in that way. But people are very surprised by seeing that crime footage in the film. That's making impact. Bill's testimony is making impact about what assault weapons do, and unlimited magazines, of course.
Kim?
I just wanted to add that I think one of the reasons it's so wonderful to travel with Abbey and Bill, and we often travel with the parents as well, is one of the things we hope that the film can do that's different by redefining victim as an entire community is to hear from, to have the film help lift up and strengthen the voices of first responders and teachers and priests and doctors who are becoming more and more vocal, so that people are hearing that through different stakeholders in communities. And that's why, and I will just, in case we forget, so on November 2nd, to clarify, we're doing something unusual where we're showing the film in 500 theaters. It's something called Fathom Events. So you can go and learn about that in our website, newtownfilm.com, but we really want to make the film a movement, have it be a dialogue opener, and then following that, we're organizing hundreds of town screenings across the country where people can bring together constituents like that to have dialogues in a, you know, Maria and I just always say we want to have this help take it out of this crazy polarized space and depoliticize it and make it, as many people have said, a humanitarian issue that it should be rather than a political issue, at least when it comes to 9 kids a day dying from gun violence.
Just as a follow-up, one of the reasons why I'm so proud to be part of this movie is because it does really highlight the public health issue. In the months following the Sandy Hook tragedy, and I was part of this, the banter back and forth, we're trying to debate the merits of how laws should be interpreted, and there's absolutely an opportunity for change. But the nice thing about this film is it really does portray what happens to families and to a community, and it lets you, the American citizen, make that decision on what's best for our country going forward. So I don't have to quote or present my argument for or against the Second Amendment. All we're asking you to do is look at this film, and there's a couple public health issues here. Not only gun violence, but also the mental health issue. Not only before the tragedy, but after the tragedy, the mental health issues going on in the community at large.
But that's a frightening thought, right? Because that's been used by the gun lobby to say that this is a mental health issue.
I feel so, I don't mean to cut you off, but I'm so confident about comment on that. First of all,
does everyone realize what we just got cut off? That the gun lobby has actually said, well, wait a minute, this is a mental health crisis. This is not about guns. This is about mental health. And so that was their argument to say, there's no reason to restrict the use of gun ownership. But you would say? I would say
that if you look at any developed country in this world, we have the same percentage of mental health issues. Okay, the same percentage of mental health issues.
We are not crazier.
We are not crazier in the United States. What we do have is an exponentially high number of gun deaths per capita. So compared to other developed countries, we have evidence for a few times as many to almost 100 times as many gun deaths. So for instance, in Japan, I think last year they had like 6 gun deaths the whole year. 6. We've had over 33,000. Yet there's the same relative amount of mental health issues. Relative to change, as far as laws, if you look at the way other issues have gone in the past, whether the public health issue of tobacco use or drunk driving and the like, if you do a bar graph of the laws that are implemented, it took a generation to afford the changes that truly were needed. You didn't just all of a sudden have one law and it changed everything. It was a cultural change. And quite honestly, I think one of the reasons why those with opposing viewpoints don't want any legislation to go through, because they do understand that once the first law goes through, it may be the next law that may affect them. But I'm really excited that we're absolutely moving in the right direction. And when we look back in a generation from now, we'll realize when the changes have fully been implemented that we are absolutely on the right side of history.
Are you all for confident that a generation from now there will be much more stricter restrictions on gun use? I mean, you know, Donald Trump continues to say, he always says, my first support came from the NRA. I mean, and he gets huge cheers that that's his community.
So I personally will say in a generation, I am 100% confident that our country will be in a better position relative to gun violence. The thing is, though, I, with all due respect, I don't like the terminology more restrictions on guns, because as soon as you say that, and I know you weren't trying to do this purposely, you automatically alienate half of society. No one's trying to restrict folks' rights to own a gun. What we're trying to do is look at common sense legislation that addresses this public health issue. So if you're someone, just like Secretary Clinton said in her debate, she supports the Second Amendment, but what she doesn't support is just many of the other things associated with it that allow unfettered access to an unlimited number of guns for people around the country.
But it doesn't work that way. For instance, in the First Amendment context, right? You know, you can make the same argument, but First Amendment absolutists always say, I will let anyone say whatever they want to say, no matter how much harm they cause. And I can recite all the cases in which, whether it's Nazis marching through Skokie, or whether it's disrupting the funeral of a dead Marine with signs that say, God hates fags, people who are First Amendment absolutists say, yeah, I don't like that stuff, but we have to have that stuff, because otherwise the next thing you do, you'll stop me from protesting against the government. And this is exactly what the gun lobby says. If you take away someone's AK-47, the next thing you'll come after my deer rifle. And I can't tolerate that idea. So even though I don't want a semi-automatic weapon, I will fight for the right for someone to have it in their house because I really want my deer hunting rifle. So yes, the slippery slope, which is, you know, I tell my students all the time, this is something, an invention that was created to prevent people from taking moral positions, right? Instead of saying, no, we're taking away your gun, and we're not letting you say that also, because we know that that causes harm, and you're not permitted to say that, with all due respect to the First Amendment, and with all due respect to the Second Amendment, for whatever the hell it means, by the way, is that we're simply not going to let you own that kind of a gun. And the word restriction is not a bad word in that way.
So I am confident that those in America who see this film and really understand this public health issue will make the right decision on behalf of their children and grandchildren going forward, and change will occur.
Thank you.
I'm very confident that that will happen.
Okay. The courts have a role here, too, and we are in a law school, so we should talk about that. New York State and Connecticut both passed gun legislation, both on assault banning of assault weapons, and on registration and background checks. And then, of course, the gun lobby took that case all the way to the Supreme Court. And this summer, in this most recent term, the Supreme Court denied the request for appeal. It decided not to hear that case, which meant that it left as constitutional Connecticut's law and New York State law. That's a good sign, right? Because the Supreme Court earlier had decided the Heller case, in which gave people a Second Amendment right to own a gun in their home, regardless of the type of gun, right? So I wonder whether you think that that, on some level, is a good sign, that even what we think is a conservative Supreme Court, to some degree, decided not to take that case and to leave. And by the way, you know, this is your older brother's work. He was early on this, Governor Cuomo. And we should all remember that if this is an issue that's important to you. Governor Cuomo was very early on this. But Connecticut's law and New York's law stays intact. Now, there's another case that just was decided last week, right, just last week. And that case dealt with the 9 families that brought a lawsuit against the gun manufacturer for civil damages. And that case was dismissed. Now, they're going to appeal the case, but that case was dismissed just last week. I mean, you know these families.
The 2 leads.
When that happened that day.
Last week when
Yep.
the decision came down.
When the decision came down.
Devastating? Are they hopeful on appeal? What are they?
Go ahead.
Devastating, certainly. However, they actually have accomplished more than anyone thought. You know, they didn't feel that it would actually get to even this point.
Really?
So they couldn't even get a lawyer to try the case. I mean, it was really very, very difficult.
Really?
People don't remember PLACA. It sort of snuck in. Mm-hmm. And that indemnification is, you know, extremely dangerous. But yes, they are definitely going to appeal. And now, hopefully, the case has actually garnered more attention. You know, there's more interest, and a lot of people were unaware of the case. So perhaps it's a bit of a silver lining.
And even I, as a layperson, learning about how they went at this and this whole idea of negligent entrustment, and learning that was an eye-opener about, you know, how these guns are marketed as opposed to whether people have the right to have them.
Huh. All right, we're going to take some questions from the audience and say goodnight to our guests. Let's take this one right off the bat, which is complicated. I understand the decision to admit the shooter from the film, but I view the shooter's mother and the way she raised him as a major contributing factor in this tragedy. Is there a way to use her as an example of why parents should not, underline not, raise their kids with guns in the home, going to school, going to shooting ranges, etc. If parents keep raising kids as she raised them, this will continue to happen. Anyone want to speak to that? The parental.
Abby?
There are campaigns in a few gun violence prevention organizations I can think of. I know the Brady campaign has a campaign to really inform parents about this, and so does Every Town for Gun Sense in America. So I think, and Rachel Dratch, the comedian, she's been doing some pieces on the irony of how we go overboard as parents with safety, but yet, you know, we go to restaurants where people have AK-47s slung around over their shoulders. So I think that there is attention being paid to this issue, and you have to be strategic, and I think get to that in a lot of different ways. And I know the Sandy Hook Promise is also addressing that by going into the schools, and even without talking about guns, talking about, you know, if you see something, say something, and signs to be concerned about.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is not a CSI movie. The focus of the movie, in my estimation, was what happens to families and a town after such a tragedy. If, besides being completely disrespectful to the family members that were referenced, if you had referenced the shooter and more about that person, I absolutely think it would have taken away from the real charge of the movie, which was to see what really happens weeks, months, years after such a tragedy to towns such as my hometown.
That question makes me think about things like in the tobacco, you know, secondhand smoke and behavioral change. You know, we always talk about there's short-term goals for what this film can do, and there's longer-term consciousness shifting behavioral goals. And I think to that end, along with the work of Sandy Hook Promise, what it was a real eye-opener for me was the Brady campaign's Ask campaign, where parents could be encouraged to have a conversation with their neighbors. If I'm going to leave my kids to sleep over, I just want to ask you, do you have guns here? And you can make a decision whether to, but that you have the allowance and the right to have that conversation, and that in and of itself, you know, in the case of a Nancy Lanza would be something.
Was there some thought that the mother would in fact get sued? Whatever happened to her?
The mother was killed.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right up in the front of the film, that's right. But there was something about, I read in Wikipedia, the father is still alive, right? And the brother is still alive, right?
Are still alive.
Right.
There were 3 different lawsuits, one that you've mentioned, right? Am I correct? And
because I did read that she was not working and she had some personal wealth, and people oftentimes use the courts to call attention in a different way to this issue.
I think there are suits against the estate.
Against the actual estate. And,
Yes.
and the brother moved.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I was most curious, honestly. People have asked me if I thought about putting the father in. He had done a piece in the New Yorker. The brother was interesting to me. That was a debate. But the truth of it is neither one
You
of
mean
them.
even to have put him on camera, to talk to him?
Yeah, I saw him as this, you know, this real, you know, victim in a sense. But neither one of them lived in the community any longer. So it felt, again, not true to what we were doing exactly.
Many of these questions have very similar theme. It's the crazy-making theme that drives people nuts when they think about this issue, right? This one person's talking about these particular bullets that spread and expand in the body. Why should anyone have the right to buy that, right? That's not even gun control, that's ammunition control.
And to buy unlimited rounds of it,
Right.
of them. I mean, that's how the children that survived, the 11 kids ran out when he was reloading, finally.
And we've seen this issue come up time and time again. Was it in the shooting in Denver in the
Yes.
theater?
And Virginia Tech.
Right, the one in the theater, right, that again, time and time again, it's if there's no need to reload, you're just going to kill a lot more people. And so the question is, at least, if not the ban on the weapon, on at least the magazines that carry the weapons. I'm wondering from this person's question, or the bullets, right? The idea that the bullets are expanding, this is the point that you made in the film that was really horrific, and it was really affecting and painful to watch you describe. What is left of a child when that many bullets enter their body? And as a physician, I can't imagine, again, that this is not part of the anatomy studies that you'd ever undertaken. But this had a lot to do with the fact that each child was shot more than once.
Well, probably one of the most enlightening conversations I had early on, we were with some of the families, actually at Sandy Hook Promise, another very positive, proactive group, talking about potential legislative changes. And one of the parents who lost a child, and they weren't being flipped. They said, we're really excited we may have this legislation that limits new gun purchases to 1 a month. And I said, I'm not, did I just hear you correctly? I said, 1 a month. She says, yeah, right now you can buy as many guns as you want, and there's no limits. So it was just a sad commentary, I thought, that the mother of someone who lost a child was showing a degree of excitement that there could be a potential legislation limiting guns to 1 a month. So I will say there's a lot of opportunities for change, not to, in my viewpoint, not to restrict Second Amendment rights, but to have some common sense guidance on how we should act as a society. Okay? So again, if you want to hunt or own a weapon, there's not many people that would argue with that. But it is at least debatable whether you need to own weapons that have bullets that are more powerful than the bullets that the police officers are carrying to protect us. So I think that's at least worthy of debate. And if there's potential litigation or laws that are being considered, well, then Godspeed.
Kim?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many off-camera conversations that I've been privy to, and I don't think this one is betraying confidences, but I've had so many conversations with first responders, and particularly Hugo, who's a first responder whose own son escaped that very classroom. And, I think for me, there just isn't enough conversation out there about the effect of this on first responders at large. And maybe Bill can clarify this for me, but these weapons and those same bullets with bulletproof vests are not the same as walking into a place with handguns, correct? I mean, that's what Hugo talks about, just that we're not really addressing the genuine fear of everyday first responders.
Well, it does. So I have another one, the EMS medical director for our network, and actually I chair the Connecticut state bylaws on EMS protocols, and one of the basic things that we do is called scene safety. So because of incidents such as this, the care you are being delivered is delayed to some degree because EMS personnel are instructed not to go into a safe that is seen as potentially unsafe. So that is one consideration you may not have thought about. Another consideration is there is concern and fear that even with bulletproof vests and the like. So again, my role as a physician is highlighting this public health issue of gun violence. And whatever I can do as a member of the medical profession to decrease the number of gun deaths would be a good thing. One of the most salient points that I would like to have as far as a public service announcement, we have them for everything else, is I would love to see a public service announcement that says, you do have the right to own a gun, but if you do, you should have the knowledge that you are 5 times as likely to kill yourself as you are to kill an intruder. You're 5 to 8 times more likely to kill your wife than kill an intruder. And you're significantly more likely to have your child kill themselves accidentally than you kill an intruder.
Wow. Maria, I'm going to ask one final question. I'm going to give it to you. And I hope you won't be upset with me. I can't help but notice, and I don't think it was there the first time I saw the film, but the quote from your father is the last thing the viewer sees. And I wonder, in seeing that, in reading it, I just got chilled thinking about it. And I think you know, he died recently, and it's a sensitive subject for all New Yorkers, but especially for people with the last name Cuomo. Are you channeling, to some degree, the sense of righteousness for progressive causes and the sense of rightness that he embodied so much for his 12 years here and for the many courageous positions he took, whether it was on abortion or gun violence? Or is this something we need to ask you in 20 years?
I'm inspired by my father still every day, and I have to thank Kim. We painfully went through every credit of that film, every second of the final cut of that film, and then she somehow snuck in that quote, which was really
quote.
very, very, very special and moving. And I will just say that, you know, he was a champion on this issue, like so many other progressive causes and human rights causes, but you know, the last difficult months of his illness, I would leave him really only for this film, for filming and doing all the work we had to do. And he would always say, it's important. It's important. You have to value how you spend your time in your life and focus on the important fights. And this is important work.
Let that be our final words. I want to thank Kim and Abby and Maria and Bill. I want to remind you, if you're getting CLE credit, you have to sign out on the way out. Bill, Abby, you've shown incredible courage and fortitude, and we're really admiring of that. And Kim and Maria, this is a document. It's not just a documentary. It's a true document that will have long-lasting implications in public policy, will always be used as a way of thinking about loss in complicated ways under horrific conditions. The film achieves so many things on so many levels, and it really is quite a triumph. I want to thank you for both for doing it. Thank you all for coming.